Welcome to the Get Fit Guys, quick and dirty tips to slim down and shape up. My name is Brock Armstrong and I am the Get Fit Guy. And in this episode, you're going to learn just how quickly, or slowly, depending on your outlook on life, you can expect to see gains in muscle mass after you start a muscle building program. In today's fast-paced society of instant everything, where buying something online without having to leave your house isn't enough, we also need it delivered the same day, well, it seems to be getting harder and harder to wait for anything. Even fitness is being rushed by people who seek out quicker and easier hacks to achieve what we used to be happy to accept as a long, hard road to greatness. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, it's really just the way the world is moving. Although, with the new research suggesting that erythropoietin, or EPO for short, the substance that cyclist Lance Armstrong admitted to using in his Tour de France victories, well, apparently it doesn't actually work. So maybe we've learned our lesson on trying to take shortcuts? Well, probably not. But that's not what I wanted to talk about today. We'll save that for another day. For at least 30 years, trainers, athletes, and scientists alike have all assumed that gains made in the first few weeks of a weight training program are an illusion. Not the kind that you see at a magic show or at a science museum, but more of a biological sleight of hand. The sports scientists all agree that swelling that's caused by muscle damage is what makes muscles seem bigger, and that for any real muscle size improvements, you'll have to wait at least 6 to 8 weeks. And even the National Strength and Conditioning Association agrees with this timeline. Well, a new study has just been published that seeks to turn some of these old bodybuilding ideas on their head, or at least make some significant changes to that timeline. Which is good news for you folks who are in a hurry to look buff at the beach this summer. The new study published by the National Strength and Conditioning Association is titled, "The Time Course of Short-Term Hypertrophy in the Absence of Eccentric Muscle Damage," which is really just a fancy way of saying how long it takes to build muscles when you only move the weight in one direction. And yes, that does still seem confusing, but I promise I'll break it down for you. First, let's talk about what the word eccentric means. Now, according to the USCD page about muscle contractions, as the load on the muscle increases, it finally reaches a point where the external force on the muscle is greater than the force the muscle can generate, and thus, even though the muscle may be fully activated, it is forced to lengthen due to the high external load. This is referred to as an eccentric contraction. Still confused? Okay. Picture your mom doing a bicep curl with a huge dumbbell in one hand. Fun, right? Well, when the dumbbell is moving down toward the floor, the bicep muscle is elongating, which indicates an eccentric contraction. When your mom is moving the dumbbell up and away from the floor, the muscle contracts, which indicates a concentric contraction. Got it? Great. Let's move on. Mom, you can take a knee. In this new study, the researchers attempted to eliminate some of the confounding effects of swelling that occurs because of muscle tissue tearing, and they did that by having the subjects perform only concentric muscle contractions. So when the test subjects were doing a bicep curl like your mom just did, they lifted the weight upward, but then a lab coat-clad scientist jumped out of nowhere, grabbed the weight out of their hand, and lowered it for them, and then handed it back for the next repetition. This routine is how they avoided the eccentric contractions that are thought to induce the majority of the muscle damage. The reason they were so concerned with limiting the muscle damage and were focusing so closely on the potential swelling that might appear after crushing a hard lifting session was so that they could dispel some very particular criticisms of an older and similar study. Back in 2011, a study titled "An Examination of the Time Course of Training-Induced Skeletal Muscle Hypertrophy" observed a remarkable 3.5% increase in muscle size as measured by computerized tomography or CT scan after just 2 workouts. Yes, I said a 3.5% increase after just 2 workouts. But much to our chagrin, even the researchers that performed this study acknowledged that the initial increase was likely just a result of swelling or tissue damage and not pure hypertrophy or muscle growth as they had hoped. When we fast forward back to this most recent study that uses the fancy lab coat-clad, scientist-assisted concentric contraction-only training, the results reinvigorated the claim that true muscle growth can indeed occur in less than 4 weeks. In fact, with this one-direction training technique, the test subjects showed no signs of muscle damage or swelling, but they still showed what statisticians refer to as statistically significant increases in muscle size and weight after 7 workouts during a 3.5-week period. And in case you were wondering, the gains were assessed every 72 to 96 hours by level of soreness, lean mass, echo intensity, muscle thickness, relaxed and flexed arm circumference, and isokinetic strength. Now, there are still some doubters out there, and they point to the fact that only 10 out of the 13 test subjects actually showed significant gains in muscle size or hypertrophy during the 4-week study. Now, I agree that it is a rather small sample size, and with 3 of the participants failing to show any results, I'm left scratching my head and my chin. So, as with many scientific studies, this test likely needs to be repeated with a larger cohort before we can really start rewriting the textbooks. I think it's also important to note that the 13 untrained men who participated in this study performed a particularly heroic workout. The subjects did 5 or 6 bicep curls and shoulder presses with 8 to 12 repetitions. Each of the sets was performed to failure, which is that point in a workout when your eyes bug out and the veins in your forehead bulge and you truly can't lift the weight one more time. And to top it off, between sets they were only given a measly 90 seconds to rest. Now this type of workout takes a certain amount of grit and determination, but if you're so inspired, I think it's totally doable in your neighborhood gym. Just for the sake of your fellow gym goers, try to keep your grunting to a minimum, okay? Now, perhaps not all that relevant, but still somewhat interesting, to me anyway, is that the subjects consumed 500 milliliters of whole milk during the training. I hope it was at least chocolate milk, otherwise, no thanks. In their conclusion, the researchers wrote, "In individuals beginning a resistance training program, small but detectable increases in hypertrophy may occur in the absence of eccentric muscle damage within 7 training sessions." Certainly, it is important to remember that factors such as genetics, age, hormone levels, nutritional habits, as well as how hard you are willing and able to train will always play a factor in how quickly any of us respond to any new fitness program. But that being said, I for one am pleased to hear that my newfound bulging quad muscles aren't simply puffy swelling from muscle tissue damage, but are, at least in part, evidence that I totally crushed it on the squat rack approximately 4 weeks ago. Now, if you have any questions or comments, make sure to head over to facebook.com/getfitguy or twitter.com/getfitguy and send me a message. And head over to quickanddirtytips.com to look for the show notes for this episode number 346. Now, I'm Brock Armstrong, the Get Fit Guy, asking you, what are you waiting for? Go get fit.